Have you ever needed a fresh start, a second chance, a new beginning, the chance to move on and to move forward, the opportunity to leave your past mistakes behind and get on a whole new trajectory, a much better trajectory for your life? Most of us have been there from time to time. Some of us have been there perhaps more than a few times. Some of you listening to this or watching this might be there right now. And if so, this next chapter in Jacob's story might be instructive. It lets you know that a fresh start is possible. And a fresh start is possible for everyone. I mean, it seems to me, and Jacob's story sort of backs that up, that God is the God of the second chance, and in the third chance, and the 30th chance. God's heart is that big, and God's grace and mercy that abundant. And if you've made mistakes, it's important to know that. Important to know that and to believe that it's true, that God is the God of second chances and fresh starts. But that's not all that you need to know. That's not all that you need to know, because when you get a new start, it's also important to know how to move forward and how to make this new start an actual new beginning. Right? Because, well, the past is powerful and it has a very strong pull. And it can end up pulling you right back to where you shouldn't be. Pulling you back to doing something that's unwise, pulling you back to doing something that's unhealthy, pulling you back to doing something that's just wrong, that's something that God just doesn't want you to be doing. And that would take you right back to those same messy places again, which you don't want, right? And, well, God doesn't want that for you either. Which makes this part of Jacob's story an important one for us to look at. See, Jacob certainly had made all sorts of mistakes over the years, and he'd done plenty of things that God would say, no, you shouldn't do that, multiple times. But here he is, and at God's direction, Jacob had now returned home to the land he'd run away from, and on the way back, he had another one of those strange God encounters where God let him know that, yeah, I'm still with you. And he even made peace with his brother Esau. So he certainly got a divine do-over here. But how's he going to make that new start last? Right? And how to keep from being pulled back into those same unhealthy patterns that had repeated themselves over and over and over again. That's what this part of Jacob's story is about. Now here's the first part of that. Part 2 is next week. Okay, we pick it up in Genesis chapter 35. Listen.
Then God said to Jacob, "Go to Bethel and live there. Make an altar there. I am the God who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau." So Jacob said to his family and those who were with him, "Get rid of the foreign gods which you have. Wash yourselves until you're ritually clean and change your clothes. Then let's go to Bethel. I will make an altar there to God, who answered me when I was troubled and who has been with me wherever I have gone." So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods they had in their possession, as well as the earrings that they had on. Jacob buried these things under the oak tree near Shechem. As they moved on, God made the people of the cities that were all around them terrified, so that no one pursued them. Jacob and all the people who were with him came to Luz, that is, Bethel, in the land of Canaan. He built an altar there and called the place El Bethel, God of the house of God. That's where God had revealed himself to Jacob when he was fleeing from his brother. Rebekah's nurse, Deborah, died and was buried under the oak tree outside Bethel, so Jacob called it the Tree of Crying.
So we're talking about not only getting a new start, but making the most of it, right? And in that new start, pursuing the path that God would have you follow. So how do you do that? Well, here's the first big, what I'll call overarching thought that I get in this section of Jacob's story. To get that new start and make the most of it, break with the past. Break with the past. Why? Well, where did those past patterns of behavior get you? some kind of messy spots, right? So why go back there? Why did you do the same things and think you'll get different results? Someone is quoted as saying that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. And I kind of tend to agree. I think experience has taught me that. It's just foolish to think that repeating those patterns of bad behavior in a new place are going to make things turn out better. But as I've already said, the past is powerful, isn't it? Our hurts, our habits, our hang-ups, they have a way of hanging on to us and pulling us right back into the places where we shouldn't be. And again, Jacob had plenty of experience with that in his life. So to make the best of this new start that you've got to break with the past. You absolutely have to. But knowing that and actually doing that are two very different things. I mean, knowing is hard enough. Doing is even harder. So that's what we're going to explore in the rest of this conversation. What can you do to break with the past so you can make the best of the new start that you've been given? Well, as again, I look into the details of Jacob's story, here's the first thing that I notice about that. To break with the past, you got to embrace grace. Embrace grace. The past, remember, has a lot of power. Not just the power to pull us back to unwise or unhealthy or simply wrong behavior, but it also has the power to plague your spirit with guilt and to make you think, boy, after all the things that I've done wrong, there's no way forward for me. Or to think, well, this is my lifestyle now, so even if I wanted to change, I'm not sure that I can. Or to say, well, I can't even forgive myself. So how in the world could God forgive me and give me a new start? How indeed? Well, the past has a way of making us its prisoner, doesn't it? So the way forward from the past, the way forward through the pain, the way forward through the guilt, well, again, it's to embrace grace. Back into Jacob's story, chapter 35, verse 1. Then God said to Jacob, "Go to Bethel and live there. Make an altar there. I am the God who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau." So what's God doing there? He's reminding Jacob of his grace. See, the first time that God appeared to Jacob at Bethel, Jacob was on the run. After he'd done those shifty, scheming things to his brother and his father. And there at Bethel, when Jacob thought he was out there all alone, all by himself, God showed him that he wasn't. And God showed Jacob that he hadn't forsaken him or forgotten him. And that God actually hadn't turned his back on him, that he wanted a relationship with him. And God was doing something to make that happen, showing him in that vision that he was doing something to make that happen before Jacob ever understood what was going on and was trying to make things right. God always makes the first move. That's grace. And the same thing applies to us. I've mentioned this verse before, but it certainly bears repeating. Romans 5, verse 8. But here is how God has shown his love for us. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. I mean, that's rock solid truth. Rock solid truth. God always makes the first move to fix things between us and him. And we need him to. God makes the first move to undo the past. God makes the first move in forgiveness. And no matter how much we mess up, God's mercy is still more. So to get past the guilt and the memory and the pain of your mistakes, That's the first thing you got to do. Embrace God's grace. And then, number 2, you need to make a clean break with the past. Clean break, not partial one. Remember how I said that those our hurts and our habits and our hang-ups have a way of hanging on? Well, they do, Here's sort of a silly illustration of that. I might want to eat fewer chips. I eat a lot of chips, probably way too many. So if I decide I want to eat fewer chips, maybe I just shouldn't buy chips. But if the chip sales keep calling to me and I buy the chips, and even if I store them out of sight, I know that they're still there. And so when that chip urge gets me, well, I'm right back where I started. And pretty soon I'm back in the same old daily chip munching pattern that I was before. And I think it works pretty much the same with everything. Ask anyone who's ever been on a diet or wanted to start a new pattern of, let's say, getting up early to exercise or to break an addiction of any kind. Old habits and hang-ups hold on tight. And that hold can be pretty hard to break because behaviors once established run deep. Even if they're painful or harmful or just plain wrong, especially if you're still hanging out in the same neighborhood. That's why we read this in verse 2. So Jacob said to his family and those who were with him, "Get rid of the foreign gods which you have. Wash yourselves until you are richly clean, and change your clothes. Then let's go to Bethel. I will make an altar there to God, who answered me when I was troubled, and who has been with me wherever I've gone." Now, when God and Jacob first met at Bethel, Jacob had promised God, for God gave Jacob all these unconditional promises of grace and told him he was going to be with him. Jacob made a promise back to God. And Jacob said, "Well, God, if you're going to do all those things for me, and if you come through, then I'm going to follow you, and then you're going to be my God." So what Jacob's doing here is saying, okay, I'm going to do my part of that. I'm going to make you my God. And he knows here that a big part of that, a huge part of that, is to make a clean break with all those other gods his family had used to be following. He said, Jacob knows you just can't keep them around. And if you truly want to honor and serve and follow God, then those other gods can't be anywhere close to you, even if they're out of sight. Which is why he tells his family, get rid of those foreign gods. And the word get rid of doesn't mean just like put them away, hide them away, get them out of sight. It's discard. Completely get rid of. Make a clean break. And making a clean break is really about this. It's repent of the wrong, and then rid yourself of its influence, and then reconsecrate yourself to follow God in his ways. That's what Jacob's doing here with this get rid of those old gods. He's admitting that having those old gods is wrong. That's repentance. And then he's taken action to rid the family of their influence by actually burying them in the ground. And burying them is he's symbolically saying, these are now dead to me. They're in the grave, and that's ridding yourself of that old influence. And then they're doing something to show their dedication to the new way, which is, here he said, wash yourselves, change your clothes. That's that reconsecration. In some of his letters, Paul talks about that same sort of thing this way. He talks about putting off the old and putting on the new, like taking off an old, messy, smelly set of clothes and throwing them away and putting on a new set of clothes. He's saying it's like you're putting off the old nature and you're putting on Christ. And one of the places that happens for us isn't that washing that we call baptism. It's what Paul called the washing of regeneration. Well, more on that next week. But before we go on in this conversation, just take a minute to think about how that connects with your life right now. Pause and think about this. What right now in your life do you need to make a clean break from? And not only what do you need to make a clean break from, but what will help you to do that? And then as you're thinking about that, before hitting play again, talk with God about that. Say, God, I'm sorry for holding on to this. That's repentance. And God, I'm weak, but you're strong. So God, you help me get rid of that influence of that thing in my life. And then God, I want to do what you want. That's rededication. So go ahead and hit pause and think about that, and then talk to God about that right now. So how do you break with the past and make the best of the new start that God gives you? Number one, you start by embracing grace. And then number two, you make a clean break with the past. And then number three, you follow God's direction. Follow God's direction. In other words, do what God says. Do what's right. Do what's right, not in your own eyes, but in God's eyes. Jacob got that right there, and that's why Jacob's family gave him all those old family gods. And that's why Jacob buried them in the ground like they were dead to them. He got rid of all those idols. That's why Jacob and his family then traveled to Bethel, and that's why when they got there, they built an altar, because all those things, that's what God wanted them to do. That's what God wanted them to do, and so they did it. Now, sometimes that's hard, right? Doing what's right often is. I mean, can you think about how hard it must have been for Jacob's family to actually let go of all those old idols, those things that had been part of their family for who knows how long? But that doesn't change the fact that doing the right thing is the right thing to do. And that doing the right thing helps you get your new start off on the right foot. So do the right thing. Follow God's direction. And here's something else I notice in the little details of Jacob's story here, and it's important. Because when you see this, it kind of gives you the courage and the confidence to keep going on the right path, even when doing that's kind of hard. Here's what I picked up here. That God doesn't just direct, that as God directs, God also protects. Let me say that again. As God directs, God also protects. Here's where I'm picking that up. There's an incident right before this between Jacob's family and some of the people around him that made it kind of, well, maybe a little bit dangerous for him to travel and move to Bethel, and might have made the other people around him on the way there want to kind of get Jacob and his family and even get rid of him. But then you read this in verse 5. Remember, as God directs, he also protects. Verse 5. As they moved on, God made the people of the cities that were all around them terrified, so that no one pursued them. As God directs, God also protects. God directed them to go to Bethel, and they obeyed. And God protected them from the hostile people around them, and they got there. And then when they got there safely, just as God had directed and protected them so they could get there, you know what they did? Well, they honored God. Not just because God directed them to, not just because it was the right thing to do, not just because obedience is right, but I think especially here, Especially here, they honored God because they recognized that the only reason they got there, and that the only reason that they had this new start forward to build their lives on, was because of this God of grace. And you know what that altar that Jacob built was all about? Well, the altar wasn't about an event, getting there. And it wasn't about a place. The altar itself was about a person. Which is why Jacob changed the name of that place from Bethel, which meant house of God, to El Bethel, which means God of the house of God. Because the altar wasn't about the event, it wasn't about the place, it was about the person. The God of grace and the God of glory who reached out and embraced them and gave them that new start and protected them along the way. The altar was there to honor God for all that he'd done to bring them to that point in their lives. A new start with an opportunity to go in a much better direction. So as we wrap up this conversation and start looking toward part 2 of the conversation next week, well, ask yourself this. How can I do that? How can I honor God? What service can I give? What sacrifice can I make? What obedience can I offer? And what can I do to remember this God of grace who never gave up on me? Who never gave up on me despite all my mistakes. And despite all my mistakes brought me to this time and place and gave me a brand new start and a new way forward. And what can I do? What can I do to make the most of this new start that he's given me?